E for emotional maturity, empathy, and compassion. We are on the E in the freedoms framework. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you just stumbled upon this video. I am doing a 7-part series where I walk you through the freedoms framework. And each video, I teach what the letter stands for. So freedoms framework is an acronym basically, and freedoms, each letter stands for something in that process. And what the freedoms framework is a roadmap for post-awakening. It is for people that have had a spiritual awakening. They've been on the path for a while, so it's not like they're brand new to it. They've maybe gone to some retreats, they read the books, they listen to the podcasts, they know all the things, right? You know all the concepts, but there is a massive gap between what you know and what you do and who you be in your everyday life. And a lot of that is because you don't know how to bridge between all the spiritual things into like, well, my kid's pissing me off and triggering me in the same way every day. There's a huge gap between those two things. It's like you can know, okay, I'm a part of source. I'm co-creating my reality. Thoughts are things I can manifest. And yet when your husband pisses you off, or you're making all this money, but it just is leaving, or you start to have health issues because you've been living in fight or flight or freeze for way too long, and you're trying to find your way, you're trying to figure it out, and you just can't seem to do it, and you get really frustrated and you're like, something's wrong with me. Yeah, that's who the freedoms framework is for. It's not about like learning a ton of new information. A lot of the things that I teach in freedoms framework aren't new concepts. You can hear them from lots of different people. These concepts have been around for thousands of years. But what it is tools to actually apply. Like, how do you translate that into your daily life so that everything you're learning actually creates sustainable change and transformation, not just like, oh, I went to a retreat and I feel really good for 2 weeks. And then after the 2 weeks, like I go back to life as usual. And again, I'm stuck like being triggered all the time or being angry all the time or not being able to get my shit together. Like I had a great meditation, and then the rest of the day I struggled all day long. In the freedoms framework, like I said, we covered flexible nervous system, we covered strong will center, and then the next thing, probably the most important thing, especially for people who've been on a spiritual path for a while, especially those that follow, teachers that talk about elevated emotions and staying in a high frequency and never feeling negative emotion and never thinking bad thoughts and like just going above our humanity and above the lower centers and transcending our body and transcending our humanity, especially if you've been learning and applying from teachers like that. This is going to be the most challenging and probably the biggest pathway to your freedom, ultimately, to your own inner freedom instead of feeling like trapped inside. By the way, I am going to do emotional maturity in 2 parts. So this is only going to be the first part. Today, we're going to talk about just the emotional capacity and how to start working with our emotions. And then the second part, the next video that will come out, I'm actually going to talk about how we use our triggers to feel our emotions. And I'm actually going to give you the emotional regulation reset method. It's a 4-step method that I teach people for how to navigate and work through their triggers so that they're creating that emotional maturity. So in other words, they're using their triggers to heal parts of themselves. So I just wanted to start with, okay, I have some notes. So if you see me look over, it's because I wrote some notes down because I can get going off on tangents and totally forget what I wanted to say. And there are some definite important points that I want you to hear today when it comes to emotional maturity, empathy, and compassion. Okay, so let's start here. What does emotional maturity even mean? So I don't know, you can look it up on Google, but in the frame of reference of myself, my experience, and the work I walk others through, I'm going to give you my own definition of emotional maturity. So what that means to me is the ability to be with, hold, feel, and not try and change your emotions without telling a story and without getting lost in them. Okay. So the ability to be with, to hold, to feel your emotions, to not try and change them without telling a story and without getting completely lost in them. That to me is what emotional maturity is. And that's exactly the path that I've had to walk, and that's the path that I have had to take many others through. And so I figured the best way to sort of demonstrate how this started happening for me was to tell you a very personal story. So, the first couple years of my awakening, I was going to these meditation retreats all the time. And I was like I literally felt like I was on drugs all the time. I shit you not. It was as if like I was so high, but I would have these crashes. I would feel, and the crashes were more like some days I couldn't get out of bed. Like literally, I was so tired I couldn't get out of bed. But they would always be followed by like these really intense emotions and these really intense workshops. And I changed so much in my life. I mean, literally, I changed night and day, like every aspect of my life. And when you want to talk about like flying high on a disc, I was flying high on a disc. And alongside that, some of those behaviors were still consistent with old behaviors of mine, which is like running. And so even though I totally was changing so much, I was changing myself. It also came along with a lot of running still. And part of that running meant still running from discomfort in my body. And because I figured out a way to go to these retreats and feel really high, ultimately, it's like I replaced my 10-year pain pill addiction with going to spiritual retreats so I could still feel that same high, because feeling anything other than that was way too uncomfortable. I'd struggled with addiction most of my life. And so I did not know how to handle discomfort in my body. In fact, I didn't think that I could handle it. And so because of this, I was like the preacher to my kids, right? Like I knew I had to make changes because I needed to be the living, breathing example for them, and I was. I know I was the example for them, and I was also like spewing a lot of the stuff at them. And so my daughter, especially, because she was in a very emotional child. Like from the second she came out, she was very emotional and she was very strong-willed. And my son was the opposite. Like he wasn't emotional, but he was like the easy kid, like didn't never argue, didn't like listen to me, just very, he would be the one that everyone would be like, oh, he's so well mannered. Like he learned how to be a chameleon and please everybody else. And, that eventually turned into some really difficult people pleasing patterns that he's now dealing with. And my daughter was the opposite. She was like, I don't give a shit what you say. Like I'm putting my foot in the stand and in the sand and this is who I am. And she was extremely emotional. And because I've been trying to hide from emotions my whole life because I didn't think I could handle them, they were scary for me and I did not know how to handle them. And so when she would go into like these big emotional states, or she would share with me, fights she was getting in with her best friend, it was like because I was trying to bypass myself, I was trying to bypass her and be like, you just have to think positive, like stop thinking negative, stop talking negative, start feeling good about things. I mean, she was young, she's like 10. And what I found was the more I tried to do that, the more emotional she got and like the worse the situation got. So dealing with my daughter, the more I tried to like suppress her emotion. Basically, I didn't know that. Of course, I had no idea that's what I was doing. I thought what I was doing was really helpful and giving her tools to like, navigate her life. I didn't know. But what I did see was that it was making it worse. So her and I would like butt heads even more every time I tried to do this. And so eventually I had been following a teacher by the name of Dr. Shafali. She had been teaching conscious parenting for a long time, and everything she was saying like so deeply resonated. And so I'd been following a lot of her content. I'd been attempting, and in some ways I was applying a lot of that. Like I no longer saw my children as extensions of me. I saw them as their own unique individuals. I wasn't trying to shape or mold them into me. And yet I was still trying to do that in subtle ways that I wasn't aware of myself. And so anyway, I was like, it got to the point where, it was sort of like the straw that broke the camel's back. I was trying to help my daughter find some Minecraft thing on the computer. And of course, I'm trying to find it and I'm frustrated. And then she's frustrated. And it just turns into this big blow up. And I'm like, I've got to do something about this. So I booked a session with Dr. Shafali, $750 for one session. But I was like, I don't care. I'm willing to pay it. I get on a Zoom call with her, and the Zoom call didn't even last that long. And honestly, the $750 sentence that changed everything was I explained it to her. She looked at me and she said, your daughter is not wanting you to try to actually solve her problem. She just wants you to be in the messiness with her. Like, she just wants to know it's safe to be in the messiness of emotion, of human emotion. She just wants to know it's safe and that you're down there in it with her. Like, you're not abandoning her by like trying to bypass and fix everything. And I was like, oh my gosh, I have been a fixer my whole life. I don't know how to not fix. Like, that to me was terrifying. And not only was it terrifying, it was true. I knew exactly what she was saying was true, but it was terrifying because everything I had been following and using to change my life, this went into this was the opposite of that. It was like, well, no, you're not supposed to feel negative emotion. You're not supposed to like allow yourself to do this. You're supposed to like change, change, change. And so it was really kind of a mind fuck for me, to be honest, at first. But I knew it was true. Like, in that moment, that's all she said. I'm like, yeah, I get it. And so what that meant for me was, okay, if I am going to start practicing like being in the messiness without needing to fix or cover up or bypass, because I had learned to do that in my teenage years, the same age that my daughter was going into, I learned how to numb through various substances so I didn't have to feel, because I didn't think that I could handle feeling, because as a child and all the things I experienced the first 7 years of my life, I couldn't handle the emotion because I didn't have caretakers that were equipped with the tools. This has nothing to do with blaming or making, parents bad. They weren't equipped with the tools and they couldn't provide me what they didn't have themselves. And so because of that, I thought emotion was too much to handle. I learned fairly early on that I could find substances to help me numb because they were too much to feel. And so emotions were not something that I wanted to feel or was interested in feeling, which is why when I first had my spiritual awakening, I was like, oh, great, I don't have to feel, right? But the problem came when I stopped going to those meditation retreats and I didn't have that access point into like these very high, because when you're going to these meditation retreats with 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 people in a room, you can't help but be swept up into that super high energy. But then when you leave that environment and you go back into your everyday life, it's not going to be like that. And so when I stopped going and I was stuck with like my everyday life, it was like, shit, all this fear started to come back. I literally felt like, why are all these old patterns coming back? Like, what's happening? And it was really scary for a lot of years. And that was my signal of like, oh, oh my God. Like, I was actually just falling into old patterns again. Not that they weren't good. You need to have all those things. They just also have to be balanced with the deep emotional work. And that's the piece of the puzzle that I didn't know yet. And lo and behold, my daughter would be my teacher in that. So through that with her, and then also compounded by the fact that I stopped going to the meditation retreats, was like I was left with, I had no other choice but to start facing the things that I was so scared of facing. And in order to do what Shivali told me I needed to do with my daughter, I had to start learning how to do that with myself. So that was like the second part of my journey. It's called the first couple of years of my awakening, my ascent. And then the next couple of years, really the last 6 years, has been my descent into my own humanity. It was really easy for me to go up into the ethers. I'd been practicing staying and escaping my body, staying out of my body and escaping my body for most of my life. The last 6 years has been a lot slower because it's been slow and steady and like slowly going down in there, slowly releasing a lot of the emotional baggage that I just had never let my body feel because it was too scary. I want you to understand how much emotion you probably have suppressed or repressed right now in your body, and how this is actually not just like acceptable, but expected in culture and in society. So all you have to do is look at your childhood and think about how often you were allowed to feel intense emotions. And I don't just mean like sadness and anger. I mean like even the really happy intense emotions, like when you were just like playing and you were just, like loud and just, too much, in other words, for some people to handle, like that too muchness, as kids do, right? Because they don't have any inhibitions. Like, this is why people like to drink, because they lose all their inhibitions. They get to tap into their present inner child that just doesn't give a shit, right? And so they're in that phase where they just don't care. And because as adults, we can't handle it. How many times in your childhood were you told to stop crying or be quiet or like all of those things, right? Stop crying, be quiet, don't be so loud, don't be so whatever, right? Hold it all together. How often were you told that as a child? Or on the other end, how often when you were like experiencing sadness or anger or grief, whatever it was, like did your parent come down actually to your level, hold you and just allow you to have that emotional response? Like how often? Probably I would guess never, because I just don't think most parents have these tools. And because they didn't know how to hold their own emotional states. When you think about that, that's your own upbringing, right? That's your own conditioning the first 7 years that you are getting programmed into who you are now. On top of that, just look at our society and culture in general. And the way that you can see how comfortable our society is with emotion and with allowing that emotion to be seen is think about anytime you've ever seen, anytime you've ever talked to anybody, or anytime you've ever seen like interviews or anything, and someone starts crying, what is the first thing that they say? The first thing they say when they start crying, I'm sorry. Even you, right? When you're talking to someone, you start crying, oh, I'm sorry. Like even when we do this with grief, when someone dies, it's like it's proper to not like totally lose it. Like you wait and do that in the privacy of your bedroom. Because, and this isn't to say to go to the other extreme, this is what emotional maturity is. It's not getting totally lost in your emotion, but it's being okay in the presence of emotion, like just sitting there and holding the emotion and allowing it to pass fully without impeding it, without out bypassing it, without stopping it. And so it's like it's like you're double fucked, right? Your childhood, you were taught emotions aren't okay, and then we move into the culture that we are today. It's very mental based, intellectual based. It's very like emotions are not okay. Part of the problem is we're totally cut off from our emotions, especially if you've had a spiritual awakening. And here's the problem with that. Like, here's the cost of being cut off from your emotion. If you're cut off from your emotion, you're cut off from your humanity, literally, especially, like I said, if you had some sort of a spiritual awakening. And if you're cut off from your humanity, you're cut off from connection. You literally cannot connect with another human being, let alone yourself. So you're going to completely sever connection with, in my case, with my daughter. I was actually not able to connect with her because what I did was I put myself in a hierarchy without even realizing it or being conscious of it. I kept myself above her, so that kept me safe from feeling anything. And if I stayed above her by spewing all this self-help stuff and telling her to change, then I was safe up here. And then because as soon as I stopped going to retreats, I then would put myself, I was coaching, I would put myself above my clients in their emotional states. And I would, in very subtle ways, make all of that stuff not okay. And once again, I was putting myself above so that I was safe up there. I didn't have to go down in the messy humanness of things. And what happened was I started to totally isolate because I didn't feel like I could feel any of my emotions. And I especially didn't want to be, I remember even saying once, like, I don't want to get so close to that person because then we start to know each other's humanity and that's just messy. Like, I don't want to know their humanity because I was so cut off from my own. And again, what it did was just completely cut off connection. And we need connection as human beings. Like, we require it to live, to survive, we require it, but also to thrive. Like, human beings need connection. And so when you're cut off from your emotions, you're cut off from connection. You will not be able to connect with another human being. You will not be able to connect with yourself. The first step in this process, and what I want to teach you today, is that you have to start learning how just to feel safe with allowing emotion in your body. Again, one thing that's really important in that process is that we don't attach a story to it. So that means when we start to feel something come up, instead of closing down, we train our systems to open up and we allow the emotion to arise without telling a story. And we're going to dive deeper into that next week when I share with you the 4-step method to navigate a trigger when those emotions are rising to the surface. But for today, I just want to talk about, okay, how do we even start the process of feeling our emotions, like opening up the valve to allow those to start to rise? And the first step in that literally is just training your nervous system that it's safe. Number one, that it's just safe to come into your body. And once you start to relax the nervous system, because what we do is we use tension to hold down all of those emotions over all the years that we were never allowed to feel them. We use tension to hold them down, which is exactly why it eventually leads to chronic illness, because you can't stay in that tense state all the time. The body can't stay there, it can't function properly. And so the first step is like, how do I work with my nervous system? So the nervous system, the fight or flight response is the amygdala. And then from there is the limbic system, which is literally your child brain. It's where your inner child lives. It's, what they call your subconscious mind. So people say, well, you don't need to do inner child work. Like you just need to go be in the 5D. And I'm like, your inner child is literally part of your biology. Like it's anatomically in your brain. So you can pretend that it's not there, but it is there. It's in your brain. It exists in your brain. And the limbic system is where like all your subconscious stuff, like all your beliefs, all the meanings you give things, and all the things that you told yourself weren't okay to feel. And so that's also buried deep, deep, deep low in the lower centers in your body. The body holds those emotions as well. And so the first step is like we can't when we're in heightened emotional states, we don't have access to our adult brain, to our prefrontal cortex. That's literally shut off. And what happens is the amygdala gets activated. And so we're in fight, flight, or freeze. And then we're using that tension to hold down emotion. And then pretty soon our system is looking for threats everywhere. And we're in fight, flight, or freeze all of the time. And so the first step is really just training your system. It's okay. It's safe. And you can watch the flexible nervous system, the F in the freedoms framework. You can watch that video to find out how to do that. So you can just create a baseline level of safety for your body to just start turning the volume down on your sympathetic nervous system. Once you start doing that, then like I said, once that amygdala is not crazy going off all the time, then you start to move to your child brain. And so that means like emotions are going to start to rise because you no longer are using tension to hold them down. And so this is the process of reparenting. This is what I call reparenting. You can call it inner child work. You can call it shadow work. There's a whole bunch of different names, but the names don't matter. Like the practice is what really matters. So ultimately, once you start activating that limbic system brain because your nervous system feels a little bit safer, then you're going to naturally just start to feel emotion arise to the surface, seemingly out of nowhere a lot of the times. And so what is really important that you do in those moments is instead of closing down the system, you open up the system. You have to start training yourself. So this means like anytime some emotion arises, doesn't matter what emotion it is, what you're naturally going to do is tense up. And so in the video where I taught the nervous system, flexible nervous system, I gave you 8 nervous system tools. And this is what literally opens up the system. So it's using your biology to turn off that sympathetic response. And so as you use your biology to do that, you're training your body to create a baseline level of safety and to open up instead of resist. So when you contract, you're in fight or flight, but when you open and you go more into a parasympathetic, you literally open up the system. You let go of the tension. And so when any emotion comes up. So for me, it was like when I would start to feel scared or fear or sadness or helplessness, or like I was lazy. That was a big one for me. Or like I was a bad person. That was also a really big one for me. When I first started this process, when I would start to feel emotions, before, what I would do is like shame myself out of feeling those. Like literally, like I'm going to delete those. I'm going to delete those parts of me from myself. Like they're bad and I'm going to get rid of them in my spirituality. And what I found was that wasn't working and I had to do the opposite. And so literally this is what reparenting is. When I started to feel those emotions, the first step was like, I would just pour more love onto myself, like more love, more love, more love. Like in those moments I felt that, I would remember my grandma, and my grandma showed me an example of what unconditional love was, because it didn't matter what I did or who I was. It did not matter. She was pouring love onto me. I have never felt so safe and so loved by a human being than I did my grandma. It was like, I literally could do no wrong. I mean, that is like God love to me. That is source love to me. And so I would tap into that, and that's exactly what I would practice with myself in those moments is like, I was starting to become 2 different awarenesses in my body. I was starting to become the sort of my adult brain, the adult me in me activated at the same time the child brain in me was activated. So I was using both of those parts of my brain. And this is what creates emotional maturity neurologically in the brain. It's what rewires you. And this is what reparenting is. It's literally rewiring your brain. And so I would be that sort of adult, but then I would also be the part of me that was feeling all of the things. And so, because I had to do this with my daughter, this was a process I had to do with myself, which is like when I was feeling that, I wasn't shaming myself or trying to get rid of him. I was just literally being with it, just like I was doing with her. Like there's no fixing, there's no thinking, there's just feeling and being with and presence. Both of those things at the same time. That is one way to start processing and working with your and feeling your emotions. So this is like just randomly when you'd start to feel emotions, you would sort of open up the system and allow those instead of trying to shut them down or shame yourself for them. I would hold the space to feel them, and I would pour more love onto myself when I was feeling those. The way that you can sort of speed up this process and get used to allowing yourself to release emotion. And a lot of times that literally just means crying. Like crying is your body's way of cleansing itself. And we know this because how do you feel after having a really good cry? You feel really good. You feel like there's weight lifted. And so that's how we know that but it's been scientifically proven. You can look it up that the process of allowing our body to cry is like literally washing our system out. And that's what crying provides. Crying, we believe it's weak, but it's actually very strong to allow yourself to go to those places. And so crying is so important. And again, because we've been conditioned that crying's not okay, a lot of times we'll believe that we'll just be stuck in crying for forever. And that's part of emotional immaturity, believing that you'll get lost in your emotion because you don't know how to actually feel them fully. Once you allow yourself to feel the emotion fully, it passes. Like you don't stay stuck in it. You only stay stuck in it because number one, you either attach a story to it or you block it in some way. You're not allowing yourself to feel it all the way. And so that's why you believe you'll get stuck in emotion because that's how you've done it before. You haven't actually allowed yourself to feel it fully. So the second way that we do that in my work specifically is through breath work, intense, long breath work sessions. I teach all different kinds of breath work. I got certified as a Soma breath facilitator, advanced instructor years and years and years ago. And so I've been using breath work in many ways for a long time. I always said meditation is for the mind, breath work is for the body. So you need both of those things. And so for this part of the equation for emotional maturity, it's the longer, more intense breathwork sessions. Why? Because breathwork literally in the way that I do it with my clients is literally activating the limbic system in your brain. And so you are activating the child brain, which is where you store all of that stuff. It also activates all that lower stuff in your lower centers, which is where you've held that emotion in your body. So it's working within the brain and it's working deep within the body. And that's what breathwork provides. I don't recommend that you do these big, intense sessions by yourself at first. I definitely recommend you find somebody to work with, whether that's me or somebody else somebody locally. I mean, I do it with people on Zoom. We can do it via Zoom. However, I don't recommend you do it by yourself because it can be very intense and very overwhelming, especially for what comes after, because you'll start to feel all of that stuff, all of that sort of chaos rising to the surface. And so you need to have somebody to help you work through that process. And so like integration can't happen without feeling emotion. I strongly believe that. Like if you're interested in spiritual integration so that you're not just learning the things, you're actually embodying it and being it, you're actually getting to a place of wholeness, a place of like peace every day. You can't get there unless you have this component, unless you have this piece of the puzzle. You will be fractured and it'll only be half of you. You have to have the emotional maturity aspect. Again, this is what creates connection. And so if you don't have this, you're going to feel really disconnected from others because you feel disconnected from yourself, because you don't feel whole, because you haven't allowed yourself to feel whole, because you're busy shaming these parts of yourself because you're too afraid to feel. And so what this process does is help you not be afraid to feel anymore. And when you're not afraid to feel anymore, you're not going to like hold yourself back in life. You're not going to hold yourself back from taking that step of like starting that business or going after, finding a partner or like all those things that you're afraid of. You're just afraid of because you're afraid to feel what will happen on the other end of that. But if you're not afraid to feel, like, you're not going to stop yourself in life. And that's what this process gives you. If you're interested in working with a longer breathwork session, my email is in the description. So you can email me and we can discuss how I do that with my clients. So next video in this series will be part 2 of this. So that's where, like I said, I'm actually going to walk you through how to use triggers to continue to use that emotional muscle of yours, and then how to actually heal these really deep wounded parts of ourselves that we haven't been able to access through our triggers. So that, like I said, you're not like screaming at your partner for your partner triggering you in the same way every day. So that, when you are outside of your meditation practice and your kids piss you off, or your sister sends you the same text, or your boss is talking to you in the same demeaning way, and you're triggered, or you're trying to get shit done in the house and everybody's coming at you and you're like so triggered you can't even think straight. We use those actually to figure out how to heal the thing that's underneath that, so that those triggers don't happen anymore. You literally just live from a state of calm and peaceness. It's not to say you don't use flexible nervous system. You use your sympathetic response. It's sort of fire and energy you need, but it's not the dominant energy that you use all the time. So be sure to tune into the next episode in this series so you can learn that. And like I said, I'm also giving 2 bonuses in that video, which is empathy and being an empath, and judgment. Two sides of the same coin, and how to navigate both of those as well. I will see you next time.